Chapter 1. The First Thing That Went Missing. Before anyone realized what was happening, a child's existence was quietly erased by the people she trusted most. No screaming, no confrontation, just silence, chosen again and again inside her own family. I'm MC Jane, and this is a revenge story where the truth didn't arrive with anger, but with patience, records, and one moment when silence could no longer protect what it had been hiding. Stay with me, because this karma wasn't loud. It was public, irreversible, and it needed no apology. The first thing that went missing was so small that I almost talked myself out of noticing it. I am 42 years old, and I work in regulatory compliance for a regional insurance company outside Seattle. My days are built around process, documentation, and quiet inconsistencies that most people overlook. At home, life is simpler. I am raising my daughter Lily on my own. She is almost 2, at that age where everything feels urgent and temporary at the same time. Mornings blur into evenings. I measure time in naps, daycare pickups, and how long I can stand in the doorway after she falls asleep before putting her down. From the outside, my family looks fine. My brother Mark lives nearby with his wife Claire. My parents retired to Arizona a few years ago. We talk regularly, not every day, but enough that no one would say we are distant. Nothing dramatic, nothing broken. That is why it took me so long to realize something was wrong. My father, Thomas, is 71. He has always been attentive in his own quiet way. When I was growing up, he noticed things. If I got a haircut, he commented. If I sounded tired on the phone, he asked why. When Lily was born, I assumed that instinct would carry over. I sent him a photo the week after we came home from the hospital, just a printed picture in a plain envelope, Lily wrapped in a soft yellow blanket, eyes barely open, her mouth twisted like she was already forming opinions. Weeks passed, then months. Every time we spoke, my father asked about my job, about the weather, about whether Seattle was still as rainy as everyone said. He never asked about Lily, not once. I told myself he did not want to intrude. I told myself new grandparents sometimes wait to be invited into the details. The first time I mentioned it directly, he laughed and said the mail had been slow lately. The second time, he said he must have misplaced it. The third time, he told me I worried too much. Even then, I remember thinking how strange it was that he did not ask for another picture. Each explanation made sense on its own. That was what unsettled me. Reasonable answers are the easiest ones to accept and the hardest ones to question. I tried to let it go. I wanted to believe this was nothing, but a familiar feeling crept in, the same one I get at work when a report comes back clean, but my gut says the numbers were adjusted before they reached me. Not enough evidence to accuse anyone, just enough to make me pause. A few weeks later, I printed another photo, Lily sitting in her high chair, cereal stuck to her cheeks, smiling at something I could not see. I slipped it into an envelope and drove it to my brother's house. Dropping things off there was normal. Mark works long hours. Claire runs her consulting business from home. It was easier than mailing it again. Claire answered the door with her usual bright smile. She told me Lily was adorable and said I looked tired. She always said that, like it was an observation rather than a question. I handed her the envelope and told her it was for Dad. She nodded and set it on the kitchen counter with the rest of the mail. We talked for a few minutes about nothing important. Lily crawled across the floor with a plastic spoon, content. When I left, I felt relieved, like I had corrected a small mistake. 3 days later, I stopped by again to return a casserole dish I had borrowed months earlier. Mark was not home. Claire let me in, then stepped into her office to take a call. I walked through the kitchen without thinking. That is when I saw the envelope. It was crumpled inside the trash can, torn open, coffee grounds scattered over it. The photo was folded in half. The note I had written was gone. I stood there, my hand resting on the counter, staring at something I did not yet have words for. I did not feel angry. I felt hollow, like the air had shifted and I was the only one who noticed. I did not take it out of the trash. I did not call Claire back into the room. I closed the lid quietly and walked into the living room. When Claire returned, she kept talking about a client problem, her voice light and practiced. I nodded in the right places. I picked up Lily, buckled her into her car seat, and drove home with my thoughts circling the same few possibilities. Maybe it had been opened by mistake. Maybe the note had fallen out. Maybe she planned to resend it and forget. Every explanation was possible. None of them felt true. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat on the edge of my bed and replayed every conversation I had had with my father over the past year, every casual dismissal, every missed opportunity for him to ask about his granddaughter. I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself new motherhood had made me anxious. But another part of me stayed awake, the part that notices patterns for a living. I opened my laptop and started a simple document. I wrote down dates: the day Lily was born, the day I mailed the first photo, the day I mentioned it again, the day I dropped off the second envelope. Just facts, no conclusions. Seeing it laid out that way made my chest tighten, not because I suddenly understood everything, but because I could no longer pretend I understood nothing. The next morning, my father called. He talked about the heat in Arizona, about a neighbor who had planted tomatoes too close to the fence. When he asked how I was doing, I said we were fine. I almost mentioned Lily. Almost. After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen holding my phone, and something settled in me with quiet certainty. If this had been a misunderstanding, it would have corrected itself by now. Someone would have asked a question. Someone would have said her name. Silence can be accidental once. Twice starts to feel deliberate. By the third time, it becomes a choice. I still did not know who was responsible or why. I only knew that something important was being intercepted and that ignoring it would make me complicit in my own way. That night, I slept badly, not because I was angry, but because I understood the rules had changed. In my job, when numbers don't reconcile, you don't rush to fix them. You slow down, you document. You wait until the picture is clear enough that no one can argue with it. Lying in the dark, listening to Lily breathe through the baby monitor, I realized the same rule applied here. If I dismissed this feeling now, I would be choosing comfort over clarity, and whatever was happening would not stop with a photo. It would keep going, and if I missed it, I would be missing something far more important than a piece of mail.
Chapter 2. The Silence That Hurt More Than Lies. The next few days moved slowly, weighted by a feeling I could not name but could not ignore. Almost immediately, I began to notice something that had been hiding in plain sight. Nothing about Lily's information was actually disappearing. It was stopping. Every photo, every update, every attempt to include her in my parents' lives seemed to reach the same invisible wall and go no further. Once I saw that, I could not unsee it. I did not confront anyone. I did what I always did when something felt wrong. I slowed down. At work, when a case looks clean but my instincts say otherwise, I start with timelines. I map what happened, when it happened, and where the flow breaks. I decided to do the same thing here, even though it felt strange to treat my own family like an audit. I opened the document on my laptop and worked backward 6 months, then 9. I listed every card I had sent, every message I had shared, every photo I had mailed or dropped off. Next to each date, I wrote what response I received, if any. Most of the entries ended the same way: a polite deflection, a vague answer, silence. By the time I finished, my chest felt tight, not because I had proof, but because the pattern was too consistent to be accidental. That weekend, my brother invited me over for dinner. He said it had been a while. His tone was casual, almost careful. I hesitated before agreeing. Part of me wanted to avoid the situation entirely. Another part knew that avoiding it would only stretch this feeling out longer. My mother arrived before I did. When I walked in, she reached for Lily immediately, holding her close and murmuring how big she was getting. For a moment, the warmth felt real enough to be convincing. I almost let myself believe everything was fine.
We sat down to eat. The conversation stayed safely shallow. Work stress, traffic, a neighbor's noisy dog. I listened, nodded, passed dishes around the table. Then, without planning to, I set my fork down. I asked my mother if she had ever wondered why Dad never talked about Lily. The room did not freeze. It softened instead, like everyone instinctively knew this was something to step around. My mother looked at her hands for a long moment before answering. She said she had noticed it too. She said it felt odd, but she assumed it was nothing serious. She said she did not want to stir up problems over what might be a misunderstanding. I asked her if she had said anything to him. She shook her head. She said families fall apart over less. She said she did not want to be the one to start something that could not be undone. Her voice was calm, loving even, and yet something about it landed heavily in my chest. I told her I understood, and I did. I understood the fear behind her choice. What I did not understand was how protecting the peace felt more important than protecting the truth. Later, while my brother cleared the plates, I asked him about the mail. I kept my voice light, like I was asking about something unimportant. I mentioned the envelope I had dropped off weeks ago. He hesitated just long enough for me to notice. Then he said he had taken care of it. He said Claire had been overwhelmed with work and it seemed easier to handle things himself. He said he probably threw it away without realizing what it was. I asked him why he had not mentioned it to me. He shrugged and said it did not seem worth bothering me over. He said he thought it had already been handled. There was no anger in his face, no defensiveness, just discomfort. The look of someone realizing too late that a small decision had carried more weight than expected. On the drive home, Lily fell asleep almost immediately. I watched her reflection in the rearview mirror, her mouth slightly open, her breathing steady. She had no idea how many choices were being made around her, or how quiet those choices were. That night, my mother's words echoed in my head. She had sensed something was off and chosen silence because it felt safer. I realized then that silence does not always come from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from fear. Sometimes it comes from the belief that saying nothing will keep things intact. It does not. Over the next week, I noticed Claire more closely, not in a confrontational way, just observant. She was posting frequently online, photos of her kitchen, thoughtful captions about family values, reflections on balance and gratitude. People responded warmly, compliments poured in, hearts accumulated beneath every post. One post stopped me. She wrote about the importance of preserving family harmony, about choosing peace over conflict. The words were polished, reassuring. They should have made me feel better. Instead, they felt like a justification. I closed the app and opened my document again. I added notes, not accusations, dates, moments where things had been redirected or quietly erased. I was no longer trying to convince myself nothing was wrong. I was trying to understand how long it had been happening. A few days later, my mother called. She asked how I was doing. Her voice was gentle, careful, as if she already suspected the answer. I told her Lily was fine, that I was fine, that I just needed time. She asked if she had done something wrong. I told her no. I said this was not about blame. It was about seeing clearly. We ended the call politely, affection intact, but strained by everything unsaid. Afterward, I sat in my living room with the lights off, listening to the low hum of the house. I thought about how easily silence spreads when no one wants to be the first to break it, how quickly avoidance becomes normal. That was the moment something shifted inside me. I stopped waiting for someone else to fix this. I stopped hoping for an explanation that would make everything feel accidental again. Silence was no longer neutral. It was part of the problem. The next morning, I reorganized my notes. I grouped them by date, by action, by response. It no longer looked like a list of worries. It looked like a record. I still didn't know where it would lead. I still didn't know what I would do with it. But I knew this much. Choosing not to look had already cost too much. And choosing to see, once you start, changes the way you move forward.
Chapter 3.
Receipts, not rage. I moved more deliberately after that, not out of fear, but out of clarity. I stopped replaying conversations in my head. I stopped wondering who felt guilty or who might say something next. Instead, I narrowed my focus to what I could actually control. I did not bring the issue up again with my family. I did not test reactions or look for slips. I let everything on the surface remain calm while I worked quietly underneath it. In my line of work, urgency is often the enemy of accuracy. When something feels wrong, the instinct to act fast is strong, but it is usually a mistake. You slow down, you document, you understand the system before you try to change it. Emotion clouds judgment, structure reveals truth. That became my approach. I bought a simple notebook and kept it in my bag, not to hide it, but because patterns rarely announce themselves on schedule. I stopped thinking in terms of who might be responsible and started thinking in terms of when things changed, dates, sequences, where information moved forward and where it stopped. I built a timeline the same way I would for an internal compliance review. Every photo of my daughter, every update, every attempt to include her in my parents' lives. I noted when each piece of information was shared and what happened next. The result was unsettling in its simplicity. Nothing ever moved forward unless it passed through the same place first. I did not tell anyone what I was doing, not my mother, not my brother, not even friends who had already sensed something was off. This was not secrecy, it was containment. I needed whatever I found to stand on its own, without influence or interpretation. The first professional I spoke to was an attorney named Rebecca Sloan. She was in her mid-40s and specialized in family law. I told her up front that I was not looking to file anything. I wanted to understand boundaries, not cross them. She listened carefully as I described what had happened, sticking to facts rather than feelings. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and spoke slowly. She said the law around family matters is complex and varies by state. What I was describing did not automatically fall into a criminal category. Acting on assumptions or confronting people without solid grounding could easily backfire. I asked her what I should do instead. She said to stay within clear lines, keep records, avoid accusations, let behavior speak for itself. Intent is hard to prove, she reminded me, but patterns are not. Her advice was steady, not comforting. I left her office feeling grounded, not relieved. Around the same time, I reached out to Daniel Brooks, a former classmate who worked in digital security. I was careful about how I framed my request. I was not asking him to break into anything or dig where he should not. I wanted help understanding how repeated redirection shows up over time. We met for coffee. He explained that when information is consistently handled the same way over 8 to 12 weeks, that consistency matters more than any single instance. Repetition creates its own record. You are not looking for a dramatic moment, he said. You are looking for what keeps happening when no one is watching. That idea settled in my mind. Repetition. As I continued documenting, I noticed something else happening alongside my own work. My sister-in-law's presence online intensified. She posted often, photos of carefully arranged meals, long reflections about motherhood, thoughtful captions about family values and choosing harmony over conflict. The comments were exactly what you would expect. You are such a wonderful mom. Your family is so lucky. This is what real love looks like. I did not react. I did not comment or engage. I watched. What struck me was not the content itself, but the timing, the emphasis on harmony, on being misunderstood, on choosing grace. It felt less like sharing and more like preparation. That realization added a new layer of tension. Around that time, my coworker Angela, who runs human resources at our firm, asked how I was doing. We had worked together long enough that she could hear when my answer was incomplete. I told her I was dealing with a family issue and trying to be careful. She nodded and said something that stayed with me. She said when someone establishes a strong moral identity, people will defend that story for them. It feels safer than questioning it. When that identity cracks, it usually happens quietly than all at once. I asked her what causes the crack. She said inconsistency, when what people see no longer matches what they are asked to believe. That night, I added a new section to my notes: public image, private actions. I listed them side by side, not to judge, but to observe where they aligned and where they did not. It became clear that my sister-in-law was building a buffer, not aggressively, carefully. She was shaping a narrative in advance, one that framed her as reasonable, gracious, and protective of family peace. I did not feel threatened by that. I felt oddly calm. If we were both preparing, then the truth would eventually have to stand between us without either of us holding it up. I continued working quietly. I organized what I had collected. I saved copies. I avoided confrontation. I let time do what it always does when you stop trying to control it. Around the afternoon, my mother called again. She asked if everything was all right. Her voice carried concern, layered with hope that the answer would be simple. I told her my daughter was doing well. I told her I was busy. I did not offer reassurance, and I did not invite questions. She asked if I was upset. I said no, not upset, focused. We ended the call politely. Nothing resolved and nothing escalated. That was intentional. By then, I understood something with complete clarity. I did not need to win quickly. I did not need to convince anyone ahead of time. I did not need to raise my voice or force a reckoning before it was ready. I needed the truth to be able to stand on its own without me carrying it into the room. So I waited, and I kept documenting, because when the moment came, I wanted what I had gathered to speak louder than anything I could say.
Chapter 4. The Room Where No One Could Look Away. The room felt warm the moment I stepped inside, the kind of warmth that makes people relax before they realize they should not. The gathering was held in a rented event hall outside town, the kind of neutral space people choose when they want something to feel important without being formal. Long tables were covered in soft linen, glassware caught the light. Low music filled the background without demanding attention. Everything had been arranged carefully. Paula Grant moved through the room with practiced ease, greeting guests, adjusting details, making sure nothing felt out of place. Claire was already there, standing near the bar, laughing easily with a small circle of relatives. She looked confident, comfortable, perfectly aligned with the space she was in. When she noticed me, she lifted her hand in a casual wave, the kind of assumes everything is fine. I returned it and kept walking. I did not feel nervous. What I felt was alert. I held my daughter close and moved slowly through the room, exchanging greetings, answering polite questions, letting the noise wash around me. My body was calm, but inside, everything felt sharpened. I was aware of my hands, my breathing, the weight of the moment pressing closer with every passing minute. I remember thinking, once I speak, there is no going back to the way things were. That thought did not scare me, it grounded me. Claire eventually stepped forward to thank everyone for coming. Her voice was warm, practiced, steady. She spoke about family, about showing up, about how much it meant to have everyone together. Heads nodded, smiles spread. The words landed exactly as she intended them to. People applauded. I did not. As the room relaxed again, conversations restarting in smaller clusters, someone asked casually about my parents. It was the kind of question people ask without expectation, a social reflex. I answered calmly. I said they were doing well. Then I added, almost lightly, that it had been strange how my father had never asked about my daughter. I did not raise my voice, I did not change my tone, but the room shifted anyway. Claire laughed softly and said he had never been good with details. She said older people forget things. She said it was probably nothing. I nodded. I said I had thought that too. Then I placed the moments next to each other slowly, the way I had practiced. When the first photo was mailed, when the second one was delivered by hand, when follow-ups happened, when nothing changed. I spoke without accusation, without emotion, giving people time to follow the sequence. Claire smiled, but it was thinner now. She said she had been overwhelmed. She said things slipped through the cracks. A cousin near the table frowned and said she remembered seeing the envelope on the counter weeks ago. Claire turned toward her, surprised. Another voice joined in, someone who had been there when mail was sorted, who said it had been handled quickly, almost too quickly. The warmth in the room drained away, replaced by something heavier. Claire pressed a hand to her chest and said she was being misunderstood. She said she would never hurt a child. She said people were twisting small mistakes into something ugly. Her voice trembled, emotional now, drawing sympathy the way it always had. I let her finish. Then I asked her a single question. I asked why the note had been removed. The words hung in the air, simple and direct. For a moment, she said nothing. Her eyes moved around the room, searching faces, looking for support that did not immediately appear. She said she had not wanted to cause confusion. She said she thought it would be easier to handle things quietly. She said she was only trying to help. Someone asked why help required silence. She shook her head and said people were overreacting. She said everything had gotten out of hand. Then she stopped herself. She said she had been afraid. The room went completely still. She said she was afraid of losing her place in the family. She said she had worked hard to be seen a certain way. She did not want anything to disrupt the image she had built. She never mentioned my daughter, not once. I felt something loosen inside me then, not relief, not triumph, just clarity. The truth did not arrive with drama. It settled, undeniable, right where it belonged. I did not respond immediately. I did not need to. The pattern had already spoken. Paula stepped forward, trying gently to restore order, but there was nothing to restore. No one was shouting, no one was attacking. The protection had simply fallen away. Claire looked at me, her expression raw now, stripped of polish. I told her quietly that I had never wanted to embarrass her. I told her I had only stopped covering for choices that were not mine. I said silence was not kindness, and I was done pretending it was. She did not argue. As the conversations resumed in low, uncertain tones, I lifted my daughter and walked outside. The air was cooler, the noise muffled behind the door. My hands were steady, my breathing was even. I had not destroyed anything. I had stepped aside. Inside the hall, the silence that followed carried more weight than any accusation ever could.
Chapter 5. Karma Doesn't Need an Apology. The weeks that followed did not bring fireworks or public reckonings. They brought something quieter, and in the end, heavier. I noticed the change first in the smallest ways. Invitations slowed. Messages went unanswered a little longer than usual. Conversations that once flowed easily around Claire began to reroute, careful and indirect. No one announced a shift. No one had to. People adjusted without naming why. She was still present, still polite, still composed, but her words no longer carried the same weight. When she spoke, people listened differently, not with agreement, but with caution. The confidence that once filled every room she entered softened into something watchful. Karma did not arrive to punish. It arrived to remove protection. Without that protection, everything felt exposed. 3 months passed, then 4, then closer to 6. I heard updates secondhand, never directly from her. Someone mentioned she had stepped back from hosting gatherings. Someone else said she was taking a break from social media. Her posts, once polished and frequent, became sparse and careful. The comments thinned, the enthusiasm faded. Nothing dramatic, just distance. That was the pattern. Not loss all at once, but erosion. The kind you do not notice until something that used to be there simply is not anymore. My brother Mark changed too, though he avoided the subject at first. He grew quieter, more deliberate with his words. When we spoke, there was an awareness between us that had not existed before, a shared understanding that something had broken, not between us, but inside him. Months later, he called and asked if we could meet, just the two of us. We sat on a bench near the park where we grew up. Children ran past, laughing, their lives unburdened by the weight adults carry so casually. He told me he had not understood the impact of his silence. He said he had convinced himself it was harmless, easier. He thought staying out of it meant staying neutral. I listened. He said he realized too late that choosing not to see something is still a choice, and that choice carries consequences whether you acknowledge them or not. I told him I knew. I told him I had never needed him to fix anything. I had only needed him to admit what he had done. That admission came harder for him than anger would have. We did not resolve everything that day, but something shifted. Accountability replaced defensiveness, and that mattered more than apologies. Not long after, my mother Lydia asked if we could talk. When we sat together, she did not try to soften her words. She said she had been wrong. She said she believed silence would preserve the family. She said she now understood that silence had only protected the wrong things. She admitted she had chosen comfort over courage, and that the cost of that choice had been higher than she expected. I did not rush to reassure her. Some realizations need to be held before they can be set down. What surprised me most was my father. When he finally asked about my daughter, it was not casual, it was careful. He called one evening and said her name slowly, like he was making sure he had earned the right to say it. He asked if he could see her, not through photos, not through updates filtered by someone else. He wanted to sit on the floor with her, to hear her laugh, to be present in a way he had not been allowed to be before. When he visited, there were no explanations and no justifications. We spent the afternoon together, watching Lily stack blocks and knock them down again. He smiled in that quiet way he always had. The past was not erased, but it stopped standing between us. Healing did not come from confrontation. It came from clarity. I focused on my daughter, on building routines that felt steady and safe, on moments that did not need to be documented or shared. I found satisfaction in knowing I had not compromised myself to reach this place. I did not feel victorious. I felt grounded. I thought often about how close I had come to ignoring my instincts, how easy it would have been to dismiss everything as overthinking, how much would have continued unnoticed if I had chosen silence too. Karma does not need an apology to do its work. It does not wait for acknowledgement or permission. It moves when the truth is allowed to stand unprotected. The people who lost something in this story lost it by their own choices. I did not take anything from them. I simply stopped holding things in place for their benefit. What remained was quieter, but it was real. Winning does not always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like walking away with your integrity intact. Sometimes it looks like choosing not to become what hurt you. Sometimes it looks like letting the truth speak while you step aside. Before I close this chapter, I want to ask you something. If you were in my place, would you have stayed silent? Do you believe silence is ever neutral? Or is silence just another way of choosing a side? I would really like to know what you think.